This is Hank here from Free Podcast Tools. Please excuse the audio in this episode just because I'm trying to track a boom arm, but I'm standing up, moving around. So there could be some instances where I am off axis. So I apologize in advance. I am here with my initial thoughts of the Tascam Mixcast 4 and a brief comparison with the RODECaster Pro. So let's go over all buttons and ports on the Tascam Mixcast 4. I'm going to move the RODECaster Pro out of the way. So we have the power button here. It's just above being flush. So a little harder to find than the RODECaster Pro. We have the same locking power supply. We have 4 1/4-inch headphones out. Then we have the full-size SD card, which I love. That is a step above the RODECaster, in my opinion, that uses the micro. Over here, we have USB-C, and you get a USB-C to USB-C adapter. So if you don't have USB-C on your PC or Mac, you're going to have to buy a cable. We have the monitor out, which are really well done, I'll say. They're very clean, way better than the RODECaster Pro. We have line in, 1/4-inch, left, right, or you can select TRRS for phone calls or what have you. And there's also a port on the front. I'll show you in just a minute. And then we have the 4 combo jacks. Then on the front here, you can use this as a headphone 1, or you can plug in for channel 1 like a headset microphone. So I think that's really cool on the headphone port. Let's go over the front here. So up here we have a horizontal row starting with the monitor out knob. Then we have the 4 headphone knobs that are color coded. Love that. Love that feature. Then we have the separate buttons up here. Mark, stop, and then a combo pause record button. Now in the RODECaster Pro, you have to mark off the screen while you're recording. So I like the addition of a button on this Mixcast 4. I love the addition of a stop button being by itself, and then pause record being on one button is just fine. Down here on this big screen, the screen is bigger than the RODECaster Pro, which is cool. Very easy to see. I am right-handed, and I typically have my board to the right of me. Sometimes leaning across can be a little bit of a challenge because I like mine off to my right a good deal, and my notepad in front of me. But that's just me. A lot of people will have it straight on in front of them, which will be fine. Now the pads, they're a good deal smaller than the RODECaster Pro pads, which is fine. It's not a big deal. But what I love is the screen has stacked little readout to tell you what's on here. Here's the bad news though. On the pads, if you record to the SD card, you only can use one bank. Whatever bank you're set to, you're stuck with. And I think that is a big flaw. I don't like it, but hopefully they'll change it, because what gives me hope is this first bank they have, bank 0, is internal because it comes with the device. But however, when you add your sounds to it, they go to your SD card. I really hope they fix that in a firmware or change that. It's not like it's an error. They meant to do that. So it's a little frustrating for me because I love to be able to switch between multiple banks because I do podcasting, and on the RODECaster Pro, you can add files to pads in different banks while you're recording to the SD card and live streaming. I've done it on the fly. Get a piece of feedback that didn't come in under the wire, and while my co-host is talking, I just transfer it via that little software that Rode has, and the sound pads are a much better experience on the RODECaster Pro implementation wise. But effects wise, you can manipulate your voice, which I would expect Rode to follow suit pretty soon here.
You can do stuff like this and have a crazy voice.
It's really silly, but you'll see that on Twitch coming very soon, I'm sure. Fader wise, a little bit more wobble to me, just my humble opinion, when it comes to the faders on the Mixcast 4 as compared to the RODECaster Pro. A little more give, a little more wobble. And I like how my finger fits into the RODECaster Pro fader in that little divot, as opposed to this serrated looking fader here. Not a huge issue, not a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination, but still something to think about. Down here, they have the lit panel where it labels everything. I wish this was a capacitive panel where if I touch this, that channel 1 would come up on the screen, because on the RODECaster Pro, I can simply tap the channel and it sends me right to the settings. So that's a definite plus for the RODECaster Pro. Each channel on here has mute solo, except for obviously the sounds doesn't need a mute. You can just drop the fader real quick if you needed to. It doesn't have that on the RODECaster Pro either. And disappointingly enough, on the talkback feature, when I hit talkback, it only goes from channel 1, mic in, to headphones 2, 3, and 4 out. Very disappointing. I was hoping it would go to USB, TRRS, and Bluetooth, but it cannot. So let me slide this out of the way for just a second. So on the RODECaster Pro here, this is the power button I was talking about. See how it sticks out a good chunk, and it's easy to find. Same locking power mechanism, USB-C port right there. And I don't remember, I think they send you both cables with the RODECaster Pro. I can't remember though. Correct me in the comments. USB-C to USB-C and USB-C to USB-A. And then this micro SD card I can't stand on the RODECaster Pro, even though you don't need to get to it very often. It is annoying. Monitor outs. This is my third RODECaster Pro. Every one has monitor outs that are noisy. That could just be my experience. That one's headed to Michigan. Let's go ahead and give him the noisy outputs. I don't know. They are very noisy. And then they have the stacked headphone ports, which are fine. I will say this, on the Tascam, when I plug in my DT770 Beyerdynamic headphones, they're 16 ohm. I got the limited edition 16 ohm. On the RODECaster Pro, I am at 11 to 12 o'clock. And on the Mixcast, I am roughly at 9 o'clock. And then on the RODECaster Pro, you have the 4 XLR. You could buy an adapter to switch it up, but it's cool that the Tascam comes with the combo jacks right out of the gate. As I said, the sound pads are bigger. Look at the spacing in between the faders. It's kind of wasted space if you really ask me, because if you go into the Tascam, you can't get your finger in between there, and it's kind of a tighter front face. It looks that way anyway. This is a really sleek design, though, when you talk about the RODECaster Pro, and the RODECaster Pro is a lot lighter. So let me go over some of the pluses and minuses on this Tascam Mixcast 4. Headphone output, very loud. Love it. Crisp, clean, excellent. Color-coded as well. That's a huge plus to me. I know it's a little gimmicky, but it's really, really easy to keep things organized and straight. I can't do it for you right now because I'm using this as the interface to record into OBS. But if I could, I would power this thing down. And guess what? When I power it back on, these channels that are muted will still be muted. I think that's phenomenal. Great job on their part for doing that. The separate buttons here. So you have the combo record pause, which is fine. And then the separate stop, and having mark be a button. Perfect. The monitor out being clean, so I can have it set to another backup digital recorder. That's excellent. That's something I couldn't do with the RODECaster Pro because it was so noisy. They say the gain range is 66.5, which, if I'm not mistaken, is 16-ish dB higher than the RODECaster Pro. Right now, I still have the cloud lifter in place because I'm using my Shure SM7B, but I don't think I would need to do it. And I'm going to do some more tests on that. This is just my initial setup and thoughts on this device, but I'll get into that in another video, I'm sure. The really cool thing about this port up there, being able to take in a headphone microphone, I think is really, really a great idea. One of the coolest things in this device is this USB delay. So if you get in there, you could change the audio delay going over USB. That is a game changer, in my opinion, because you can have situations where the video and audio are out of sync. But with that setting right there, man, that's huge. It's usually something you have to do in OBS or some other program. And speaking of this, let me see if I can find it. If you go into the podcast and you go into the recordings and advanced, now you can overwrite a position. So you could go by the marks you made in the episode and you can re-record that section. That too lets me know they really put some thought into this device. One thing that can get a little annoying are some of the notifications that come up. What is cool about the stop notification is you can go into the settings and turn that off. However, in the problems, the minuses, I will tell you one that so far I haven't figured out a way to turn off that's absolutely obnoxious. You can also, when you're recording, you can bypass FX, just like the RODECaster Pro. So that's cool if you want a nice flat sound and just do all your production in post. Another thing that I like is the output recording volume. So when I pull that file into my DAW, it matches what I saw on my board. And I was having a lot of issues with the RODECaster Pro out of the box where the recording volume was just so much less than what I had on my meters and such. But, it just could have been the early days of the RODECaster Pro or something. But I remember that being a very huge pain. So I love when I drag this out that I'm really close to podcast standards, or I can be right at it, but I leave myself a little bit of headroom. Like I said earlier, I like how the faders are laid out like spaced wise. And then the polywave file, when I was moving it to my DAW, it just quickly spits all the recordings into my DAW, all the channels that I recorded into my DAW. And also I have not recorded very long files. All the files I've recorded have been shorter. So I'll have to dig in and see once I go over 30 minutes, does it stitch the two recordings together or does it make two separate recordings like the RODECaster Pro did when it first came out? On the minus front, you can't switch the sound pads, like I said, while you're recording to the SD card. That's a huge minus if you are doing something where you need more than 8 sounds. The talkback feature not working with remote guests is terrible. I think that is a no-brainer that should be something that podcasters would want. If we're taking phone calls or any number of things, we might want to have a quick side conversation without it going out on air. The meters also suffer the same problem as the RODECaster Pro did when it launched. Just having these generic hashes instead of having actual numbers on here like the RODECaster Pro does now that you can switch in settings. But hopefully Tascam will make some updates to this thing. Out of the box, the settings are horrendous. The first recording I did, I turned on some of the effects. One of the effects, its default was to cut off anything under 300 hertz. And it absolutely sounded horrendous, like you can imagine. It lacks detailed granularity, but remember it took Rode a while to add that deep granularity. This has some granularity, but not to the depth of the RODECaster Pro yet. Also, a big thing on the Mixcast 4 that's missing is an overall master compressor, something to tame everything. They have the setting in here that's called auto mix, but I don't want to use that. So I'm sure they'll say, if I asked them, they'd say, well, turn on auto mix and it'll level everything out and stuff. But I should be able to handle all that stuff myself. And there should be a master compressor on this device that is just simply taming all the signals. So the fact that they have a setting in there that allows the device to kind of set what levels should be at lets me know that a software update could make this happen. And then the most annoying thing on the device, every time I power it on, if you see that little red dot, that is because I have phantom power on. And every time I power the device on, it says, are you sure you have a condenser microphone? Are you sure you want phantom power? Something to that effect. And you have to click yes. And it's just one of those simple things that over the course of a year is going to get very obnoxiously annoying because I have a cloud lifter in place and I need phantom power to power the cloud lifter. So technically my answer would be no, I don't have a condenser in here, but you get my frustration. And I'm going to do some retesting on the preamps themselves, and I'll just drive just the SM7B by itself, no cloud lifter in place, and I'll let you be the judge of the preamp. So we'll put a pin in that topic and I'll readdress it at a later date. And then another minus is that I've said a couple times, the faders feel really cheap, in my opinion. So a lot of people keep asking me, RODECaster Pro, Tascam Mixcast 4. Let me say this. If you don't want to dig deep into the settings to get something set up, and if TalkBack is pivotal to doing like live streaming, your live streaming setup and such, and you need more than 8 sound banks, definitely get the RODECaster Pro. But if I were doing just local in-studio recordings and then I was editing in post-production after, I think I would lean towards the Mixcast 4. But for somebody like me that's got a lot of online streaming to do, I take phone calls, and the TalkBack feature is pivotal. The sound pads are pivotal for me. If you're a real heavy-duty live streamer, I think you would lean towards the RODECaster Pro. That's just my opinion. Consider that the RODECaster Pro has had several firmware updates. It's more of a polished device. So keep that in mind as well. Whereas the Tascam just came out, I'm sure they're going to make some updates and such and fix some of these things. But until they do, the safer bet, in my opinion, for my use case, is the RODECaster Pro. Your use case may vary. I think it's a good first effort, though. I really appreciate a lot of the stuff they've done with this. Just a few things that just don't make that much sense to me. And hopefully they'll address. Again, I apologize for the audio. I'm kind of moving around and such, so a little annoying, but it's the best I could do with this kind of a setup. I usually don't record about products in an overhead tight position, so this is all new to me. Please like and subscribe and share this video out. Thank you so much.